Vital route north, particularly now that we hear that the 4th Infantry Division, another 30,000 or so troops, which was going to come into Iraq through Turkey. You'll remember they weren't allowed to by the Turks. They've had to go down south and back through Kuwait, and they are all going to have to come up this route as well. It's a very, very important strategic point for them, but what they didn't want to have to do was to continually fight this guerrilla war to hang on to it. They thought that when they moved into the town that they would be greeted, they hoped, as liberators, or at the very least that there would be that the population will be passive about them, and that may well be the case for the majority of the population. There have been refugees leaving the town all day today, but there is a fierce group of fighters in there who are harassing the Americans all the way.
James Mates, near Nasiriyah, thank you very much indeed. There's fighting across the rest of southern Iraq too. In a moment we'll be hearing from Philip Ray-Smith, who's with the 7th Parachute Regiment. First, Romilly Weeks reports on how the British troops of 102 Logistics Brigade came under fire as they tried to distribute aid to the Iraqi population.
As soon as the army convoy reached Al-Zubayr, people started streaming out to meet them. Groups of young men and children ran to reach the first aid to be given out since before the war began. The situation was tense. The aim was to feed the people, but this was aid with an armoured escort. In this town there'd been guerrilla fighting up until a few hours before. Within 15 minutes, a crowd of perhaps 1,000 had built up. Most seemed friendly. Those I spoke to said they were without electricity or running water and had only a few days of food stored. But some clearly didn't want us there. All were desperate to get to the supplies.
No one knew what to expect here. The people here are clearly desperate for the food and water, and the army is struggling to keep control.
Order broke down completely as the crowd started grabbing boxes of water. It seemed like it might turn ugly, but the army lined up and managed to hold the crowd. Moments after these shots were taken, we had to stop filming.
Well, we've had to retreat out of the town with the army and the aid convoy. What I'm told happened is that local militia fighters started firing on the crowd. Everyone scattered in panic. No one was injured as far as we know, but presumably trading aid for bullets was not part of the plan. Romilly Weeks, ITV News in southern Iraq.
Ammunition is delivered to the battlefield. If you thought war in Iraq was just about the battle for Baghdad or Basra, think again. Away from the cities, an important but old-fashioned fight is taking place. In the grim landscape south of the Euphrates, the British Army is holding off 3 Iraqi divisions, so the Americans can concentrate on conquering the capital. For the most part, the fighting isn't hard, but the conditions are grueling. This is the desert in a thunderstorm and with Iraqi shells landing nearby. Not a pleasant place, but soldiers here say they're prepared for it.
Coming out here, it gets really cold. I mean, as you can see, quite dirty, but we're getting on with it.
You get quite used to it. I've been on plenty of exercises where we've been in Senny Bridge and it's been boggy like this. It's been wet, it's been cold, it's been raining.
Desert warfare, like the weather here, is unpredictable. But after 7 days of this conflict, these British gunners seem sure this will not be the 2-week war that was billed. Philip Ray-Smith, ITV News, Southern Iraq.
Yes, we have. This is finally the opening of the Northern Front, much delayed. The main culprits for delaying it, if I can put it that way, is the Turkish government. They actually blocked for a period of weeks the progress through Turkey of the 4th Infantry Division, a very powerful mechanized formation which was supposed to be an absolute keystone of the American plan for invading Iraq. It was supposed to plow through the northern part of Iraq and attack the city of Mosul, which is just down the road behind me. That did not take place because the Turks would not allow the American troops to come through overland. Finally, this week, they conceded one significant point, which is overflight rights. And immediately we had this dramatic, even melodramatic arrival of 1,000 men of American airborne soldiers who flew out of Italy last night and parachuted at low level into northern Iraq. Interestingly, they chose to parachute into an airfield which had been secured for them for weeks and improved for them for weeks by the Kurdish forces, who are in full control of that area. The airfield is actually about 50 miles behind the front, roughly 50 miles from where I'm standing now. But it is the start of something big. They are now going to be reinforced robustly, we are told, with equipment, with more troops, and it must be assumed that together with Kurdish Peshmerga forces playing some role, they will now take on the Iraqi defenses behind me here on the road to Mosul, and quite possibly at Kirkuk as well.
Force in the north, securing an airfield in that Kurdish-controlled region. The force is only about 1,000 U.S. Army paratroopers. They dropped in on Thursday. Commanders say the northern force is going to shore up the Kurdish lines. Then they're expected to move on to Baghdad to help those ground forces in the central region put the squeeze on the Iraqi capital.
It was the first time the injured Americans had been able to publicly relive their ordeal. At a packed news conference on their German airbase, they told how they'd come under fire.
A rocket hit our truck from the front, blew me out of the truck. I was a little dazed. Next thing I remember, I started engaging the guys to the left of us who were firing at us, the civilians who were firing at us. That time, another rocket was fired from the front. It was a wire-guided missile, because it came pretty close. I got to see the wire as it went by. Announced to my soldiers behind me that there's a rocket, get down. They all got down and moved out of the way.
I looked down the road, and right as I looked, there was a rocket headed toward us. It was just like in the movies. It didn't make like a horrible loud noise. It was just like this whizzing noise. I thought, you know, oh my God, I'm gonna die. And I thought, no, I'm gonna lose my legs. It's gonna hit the truck. You know, I gotta tell the guys. And so I announced RPG to the other guys in the truck, and that's when we got hit. Like no sooner had I said it than we got hit by the rocket. It blew Sergeant Villefane out of the side. I was knocked up out of the turret, landed on top of the vehicle, and my legs went numb. I looked down, I saw I still had my legs, so I was pretty relieved about that.
They were asked what they thought of the progress being made by coalition forces.
I think personally that America's and the British are doing a very good job. I think they're pushing up a lot faster than I thought they would.
As far as a unit, we were going along with schedule, and going off of what my chain of command says, they're going along with schedule, and so I'm just going to have to trust that we are still going along with what is scheduled and what they planned for.
Yeah, I thought it was going pretty smoothly, and just like what he said, there's always going to be casualties in the war, and if we're going to reach for that goal, then some people are going to have to die getting it. Depends on how much you really want it.
These soldiers are now recovering in hospital. For them, the war is already over. Harry Smith, ITV News.
At Basra airfield in Kurdish territory north of Erbil, an American base is taking shape. Around the perimeter, soldiers of the 173rd Airborne Brigade are digging foxholes. At present, there are 1,000 of them. Soon there'll be more. They're expecting to bring in tanks and armoured personnel carriers. The troops are trained for precisely this type of operation. It's not entirely clear why they were obliged to parachute in this time, but it certainly added a touch of drama to the whole business. As it grew light, American planes attacked the Iraqi positions again and again. This has been the heaviest bombing here in the north so far in this war. None of this heralds an attack on anything remotely like the scale we've seen in the south, but it does seem reasonable to assume that within a week or so, the Americans will be punching their way across the Iraqi front line here, trying to capture Mosul in that direction and Kirkuk over there. I'm afraid the Peshmerga... But all of this requires local help.
Without the Kurdish forces, neither the landing would have been secured, nor the easy movement of the troops would be done easily.
The local knowledge and manpower of the Kurdish forces will certainly be needed by the few thousand Americans and British troops here. The Kurds are well trained and disciplined. and they're impatient to start. John Simpson, BBC News, Northern Iraq.
British artillery in action outside Basra. In the last 24 hours, British forces have had to repel an advancing column of Iraqi tanks. Now they're mopping up pockets of resistance. Royal Marines from 40 Commando have been moving up the Fao Peninsula, clearing barracks abandoned by the Iraqis. Out on the roads, they're wary of civilians. Iraqi troops have reportedly been discarding their uniforms, then shooting from ordinary vehicles. But last night's surprise advance by Iraqi tanks appears to have been a bad mistake.
What happened was our troops were able to engage the 14 tanks before the Iraqi troops had a chance to engage them, and they successfully destroyed all 14 tanks.
Coalition troops now control most of the desert outside Basra, but the city itself is still in the grip of Saddam's forces, and that's proving to be an unexpected problem.
In Basra, we've come up against some stiff opposition from a mixture of regime paramilitaries and the remnants of the Iraqi Army's 51st Division, who we believe have been coerced by the regime to reoccupy their equipment.
Inside Basra, supplies are running short. The largely Shiite population that once rebelled against Saddam is being closely watched by officials from the ruling Ba'ath Party.
Every factory has a cell of Ba'ath Party, and of course Ba'ath Party has active members and then there are sympathizers, and so the sympathizers of Ba'ath Party run into about 4 million, and that is a part of a population of 25 million. And Ba'ath Party also has branches in every neighborhood of every city and town, and I think they are basically the eyes and ears of the regime.
The unfortunate citizens of Basra now find themselves in the worst of all worlds. Wary of the British, terrified of Saddam, thousands streamed out of the city today in search of food and water. For them, the future of Saddam's regime is now less important than the task of simply feeding their families. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Well, more explosions just a few minutes before I came on air to speak to you. The US forces have been again bombing positions in Nasiriyah behind me. Some very large clouds of smoke have been rising from what I'm told are a type of cluster bomb being dropped on Iraqi positions. Fighting certainly seems to be intensifying here after an overnight surprise rocket attack on US Marine positions. So Nasiriyah still very much in the thick of fighting 5 days after it started.
Our children, women and elderly people who cannot afford to protect themselves as the younger people are doing.
The Iraqi communications network has been hammered. This is a telecoms building. Somehow, though, orders seem to be getting through to Saddam's soldiers, and Iraqi TV is on the air. Within the last hour, Baghdad has been attacked, and the Iraqis are once again accusing America and Britain of targeting civilians to break the country's will to fight. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.
Telling their families that the males must fight for the regime or they will all face execution.
Simon Chappell's fighting his own war in Iraq. A battle against fear, a battle for trust.
There's no stone, but there's a small cyst, and this is difficult to explain.
An RAF doctor on a mission to persuade, hoping to convince Iraqis that the British force which has invaded their land is friendly. Simon's holding the first of what he hopes will be many clinics, treating children suffering from severe diarrhea after drinking ditch water, adults wounded by shrapnel from missiles. It's the only medical treatment they've seen for weeks.
It's important because in this area, people feel threatened by the regime, and they're just ordinary people, and we need to win over their hearts and minds to show them that we're on the side of good rather than evil, as we're being portrayed by the regime.
And this is another reason why Simon's work is important. The southern Iraqi town is a forward operating base for the RAF's helicopters. Mines are being cleared from the area around the runway, but some reappear in the same place within hours, a sign that the town may be harbouring forces loyal to Saddam Hussein. Sleeping in the open, it's a harsh existence at this RAF base. Minimising any risk is important.
This couldn't be a more inhospitable place to operate from. Not only are the living conditions tough, but there's also a serious threat from Iraqi snipers.
Simon thinks he's making a difference, but even his clinic needs protection. Jonathan Charles, BBC News, Southern Iraq.
Ottoman's helmet was struck by 4 Iraqi bullets. Although the outer webbing was damaged, the heavy plastic casing inside the helmet remained intact, and Eric was unhurt. At his home at Fleetwood in Lancashire, Eric's family were not entirely sure whether to laugh about the incident or to cry.
Festival controlled territory to secure a key airfield. Some reports say the Americans are planning to land 5,000 to 6,000 reinforcements and heavy equipment here. A British defence source has said the first priority of US-led forces in the north is to shore up Kurdish lines rather than to move on to Baghdad. The new front will reportedly chiefly serve to stabilise the region and secure important oil fields near Mosul and Kirkuk. US troops were engaged in fierce overnight fighting near Nasiriyah. North of the town, the Americans have used heavy artillery and Apache helicopters to try to dislodge some 1,500 Fayadeen fighters guarding a bridge across the Euphrates River. And further south, coalition forces are still also encountering stiff Iraqi resistance. The situation in the area is still unclear. British military sources said its forces had destroyed 14 Iraqi tanks that broke out from Basra, heading south. The heaviest fighting seems to be going on in the area around Najaf, some 150 kilometers south of Baghdad. The US says over the past 3 days, up to 1,000 Iraqis have been killed in the area. These pictures show a US self-propelled howitzer in flames after it misfired during an intense battle between Iraqi soldiers and US forces north of Najaf. There are also reports of sporadic fighting coming from the southern port of Qaza and the Al-Faw Peninsula. Coalition forces say they're coming up against isolated pockets of resistance. The coalition has reportedly managed to extinguish 3 wellhead fires, but 6 are still burning after being set alight by Iraqi forces.
Elements of the 3rd Infantry Division, but for 48 of those 72 hours northward, the cavalry was hanging out almost virtually by itself, the only unit north of the Euphrates River, and it was taking sharp counterattacks from the Iraqis, particularly Crazy Horse Troop. The road, which you can see the ARC convoy riding down now, was nicknamed Machine Gun Alley because of firing on both sides of the road. That was 2 days ago. This is the 7th Cavalry pushed its way northward to a very strategic bridgehead 60 miles south of Baghdad, blocking any counterattacks from the Iraqis on in the direction of An-Najaf. Joining me now to discuss some of that fighting is First Sergeant Todd Woodhull. Sergeant, so they don't think I'm exaggerating. How was that fight?
Pretty fierce for a while. A lot of bullets flying, RPGs, heavy machine gun fire, Air Force involved, of course, as you know, dropping bombs around us to keep people off us at certain times.
When we went down Machine Gun Alley, what were you thinking?
Well, with my hatches closed, a little scared, I had to do a couple times, reach in and talk to the man upstairs and say, help out a little. I don't know if we can do this all ourselves, but it worked. Of course, you know that we got through it and took a lot of fire. A lot of bags got shut up, cans and sides of Bradleys and tanks, but did what we were taught to do, and it worked out pretty good.
I heard Sergeant Wheatley cursing the Iraqis today because they put a bullet right through his rucksack.
He sure did. They cut his rucksack in half. He lost some of his equipment, but that was the least of our worries, I think, at the time. Very scary.
How serious was it, do you think? Because 7th Cavalry was really out there alone. There were sandstorms. You really couldn't call in close air support at that point. How much were we hanging out?
In 21 years, that's probably the worst I felt in any situation where I felt alone with just my unit to help me. And what we were hearing, the amount of vehicles that were traveling in our direction to attack us, it made you wonder if anything was going to happen positive, but it turned out to work out the right way for us.
Mortars popping both sides of the road.
Both sides.
RPGs. What's it like when an RPG comes zooming at you?
A little fireball shooting at you, and you hope you see the fireball go by instead of hitting the side of your vehicle. But we were lucky. Everything was going overhead or hitting in the ground around us. And it happened fast, furious. It seemed like forever, but very scary.
Last night, when we were in back of the colonel's vehicle, and
yes,
you could hear them getting reports of a 1,000 vehicle convoy moving south towards Apache Troop. What were you thinking at that point? In the dark, you couldn't see anything. 1,000 Iraqi vehicles moving in your direction, pitch black.
You know what I thought first. I went there, and then I just listened to the commander talk about how we'd have to position ourselves to fight that. And as things went on, it started to work out. The artillery helped. We started laying down ahead of us, and things changed direction and obviously worked out in our favor.
What did you think when you heard there were B-52s overhead?
I was worried how close were they going to drop to keep us safe, but definitely being there, you'd know it's very scary, keeps you on your toes.
Tell me what's very scary.
I don't know if I can say that on the air, but it's keep you very tense, tight, not knowing what's going to happen next, worried, thinking about a lot of things, not just at that time, but thinking about your life in general. Are you doing the right thing? Is everything going the way it should go? I think we're doing the right thing when this is all said and done, and the mission's completed. It's going to be worth what we did.
And the last question, Sergeant
Yes,
Woodhull, when we were coming down Machine Gun Alley this morning back to our position in the rear to refit, you saw dead Iraqis by the road. You saw burned out Iraqi vehicles. What'd you think when you looked at those dead Iraqis?
At the position we're put in, we're here to do a job, and that's to fight. And what we're doing right now is if they shoot at us, we shoot back. If they're not shooting at us or not armed, we don't fight that enemy. We're only fighting an enemy that's fighting us for now.
And as you've talked to your fellow soldiers past couple hours, did they kill a lot of Iraqis in the past 72 hours?
Yes, sir. Different tanks will tell you 20, some up to 60. Some of the Bradleys have killed 20 to 30 soldiers. Trucks with heavy machine gun weapons.
Why do you think the Iraqis charge like that, almost kamikaze? Nothing more than a Kalashnikov charging a tank.
I don't know if they know what they're up against right now.
Thanks very much. We've been talking with First Sergeant Todd Woodhull, Apache Troop, U.S. Army 7th Cavalry, describing the fighting that the 7th Cav has gone through in the past 72 hours, especially that period when it was out there alone, the only unit of the U.S. Army north of the Euphrates River, and it was facing counterattacks from the Iraqis. Back to you, Jim.
British calls soft operations, military action aimed at counterinsurgency and trying to win hearts and minds. The British are setting up checkpoints all along this road from the border up to Basra, not only to secure the area militarily, but to also try to show the population that they are in control and to try to instill some confidence.
Obviously, there is a hardline militia which is working in this area to try and basically intimidate people and stop them speaking to us. So as part of our role, one of our key roles is to make the civilian population feel safe. If they feel safe, they'll talk to us. We'll get intelligence, and obviously that's going to help us greatly.
British soldiers tell us they have found ammunition and artillery rounds along the road, possibly to be used to ambush them. But on this day, the Iraqis driving by are mostly good-natured and cooperate readily with the military searches. Some wave white flags as they approach the checkpoints, and many tell us they are still afraid. They don't know exactly who's in charge yet. Others say they welcome the Allies' arrival and Saddam's eventual departure. But most of the people tell us they are hungry and thirsty. When soldiers asked to see inside these barrels, they found them filled not with weapons, but water, collected from the recent rainfall. And we watched these women scoop water from puddles on the ground. Christiana Manpour, CNN, on the road to Basra in southern Iraq.
Pounding Iraqi army front lines in northern Iraq. When the bombing ended, nerves were still on edge. At the sound of a plane, Iraqi soldiers scurry for cover. Others dig in deep for the next strike. Less than a mile away, Kurdish fighters in the village of Kalak keep a close eye on their old foes and wait. They had confidently predicted that once the shooting began, the Iraqis would come down the hill with hands up. That hasn't happened. American propaganda leaflets and bombs, not quite enough to convince the Iraqis to call it quits.
I think we're going to break off this live shot for the time being. We're not sure what we see up there. Goodbye. We've got to dive for vehicles, we think. See ya. Bye.
All right, Walt, get cover there. Walt Rogers again, Charlie Miller there, embedded with the 7th Cav in central Iraq. And don't want to keep you on the air, Walt. Certainly when something like that's happening, they have had a very rough go at it, moving well into Iraqi territory, well about 220 miles into Iraq.
They've got They've got some missiles, it looks like, coming over them or toward their positions. Very difficult to tell just looking at the videotape, but those weren't airplanes, number one.
Well, Jim, first, the sand and dust have finally settled here at the 101st Airborne's forward operating base in central Iraq. You'll recall we had a little bit more than a 48-hour, very brutal sandstorm. But before I go on, I wanted to show you some of the video because